The music industry has been security stunned and the hip-hop community in complete shock, according to reports from various sources. What was supposed to be a triumphant reunion concert devolved into a full-scale battle between two former brothers in arms. Yes, you read that correctly. Fists were thrown, harsh words were exchanged, and the aftermath was pure chaos. Eyewitnesses say it began as a heated argument over the performance order, but swiftly turned into something much darker with broken equipment, shattered egos, and flashing police lights within minutes. Both Camron and Jim were allegedly cuffed and hauled away as cameras rolled on social media, shocking fans. Many people are asking, is this really the end of Dipset? What could have caused such a public breakdown between two legends? Stay tuned, because what's coming next isn't just shocking. It's the kind of raw emotional drama that no one saw coming, and trust us, this is only the beginning. It all began on a night that was supposed to be a celebration, when fans flocked to see the long-awaited reunion of Dipset Camron, Jim Jones, Jules Santana, and Freaky Ziggy. The venue was buzzing with nostalgia, with people wearing vintage Dipset merchandise, listening to classic songs on their phones, and sharing tales of how these artists influenced a whole era of hip-hop. However, what no one knew was that scene behind the scenes had been building for weeks, and tonight it was going to explode in a way that would change everything. Word started to spread around midnight, and soon after, frantic social media posts gave way to video clips from Backstage. At first, it was difficult to follow what was happening because of the shaky footage, blurred faces, and muffled yelling. But one thing was clear: Ron and Jim Jones were engaged in a heated argument. It wasn't just verbal. Chairs were overturned, equipment was smashed, and voices were raised to deafening levels. Those watching the videos couldn't believe it. Two brothers who had been inseparable were now locked in a full-blown fight just minutes before they were supposed to take the stage together, leaving fans stunned, confused, and heartbroken. Jim Jones wanted to start the show with his solo hit "We Fly High," but Camron insisted they stick to a classic Dipset track. What should have been a small argument quickly turned into a heated argument when old grudges were reopened. Jim accused Cam of constantly trying to control the spotlight, and Cam responded by accusing Jim of being disloyal and going solo. When the group was disintegrating, the room was filled with security guards, stylists, and other staff members who were all trying to defuse the situation, but neither man was backing down. According to one crew member, it was like watching a family disintegrate in front of us. The fight wasn't just physical, it was emotional, as both men shouted things that had been buried for years. Jim reportedly screamed, "You left me out." Cam retorted, "You've always been jealous of me." Admittedly, those close to the group claim that even though they had previously made amends in public, behind closed doors tonight, all the forced interviews and fake smiles came undone in a matter of seconds as the chaos unfolded backstage. Fans outside were becoming restless. The show had been delayed for more than an hour, and people were starting to chant, unaware of what was going on, little knowing that their favorite artists were being handcuffed just a few feet away. Police had arrived after security had called in to report a violent altercation that had left a staff members injured, one of whom had a busted lip. When police arrived on the scene, they discovered that both rappers were still screaming at each other while being pulled apart. A member of the crew had filmed Camron being let out in handcuffs, his face red with rage, and Jim Jones following. Shortly after, his chain ripped his voice from yelling, and the crowd outside the venue watched in shock as the two were led into separate police cars. Fans screamed their names, some pleaded for them to stop, and others just recorded the moment in stunned silence. What was supposed to be a triumphant return had instead become a nightmare. Media outlets picked up the story within minutes, with headlines like "Dipset reunion ends in chaos," and "Camron and Jim Jones arrested after backstage fight," flooding social media, and people started posting old videos of the two laughing together in interviews, recalling their relationship and contrasting it with the violent fallout that had just transpired. Made the betrayal feel personal to many fans who raised us. One Twitter user wrote, "We grew up on Dipset, this feels like our big brothers fighting." Reactions were all over the internet, with some people saying they saw this coming from a mile away, others shocked, and some saying they saw it coming from inside the jail that night. Jim and Cam were placed in separate holding cells, and despite the prompt arrival of their legal teams, the damage had already been done. Those close to the situation said that both men were shaken, not only from the fight but also from the reality of how far they had fallen. One insider shared, "Jim kept pacing, asking how it got to this point. Cam just sat with his head." One crew member claimed that Santana, who had been getting ready in his dressing room when the altercation started, attempted to mediate once he saw things getting heated, but by the time he got to them, it was too late. "It was the quiet after the storm, and it said more than any punch could ever do," Joel screamed. "Not like this, man. Not after everything we've been through. Insiders claim that he broke down backstage and needed to be comforted by his team. After witnessing two of his closest friends being dragged away by police, the fallout was immediate. As sponsors withdrew from the tour, fans demanded refunds, and concert promoters started reevaluating future Dipset shows. Industry insiders whispered that this could be the last nail in the coffin. As they were already on thin ice, promoter, this might be the end. Social media only made the drama worse. Fans argued over who was at fault, with some accusing Camron of being overbearing and others accusing Jim of being aggressive and insecure. Regardless of the side people took, it was obvious that the dip was over. But even in the midst of the chaos, there were voices calling for peace. One post said, "Come on, dip up, y'all are bigger than this. Fix it before it's too late." Another said, "Hip-hop needs you all together, not split apart like this." However, as the dust settled and the city attempted to come to terms with what had happened, it was unclear whether or not those words would reach Cam and Jim. However, one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, just as everyone believed the drama had reached its climax, something unexpected happened. A leaked voicemail purportedly from Jim Jones, who was still in custody at the time of the fight, started making the rounds online. Jim's voice was low, tired, and filled with pain. He spoke slowly, as if every word weighed him down. "I'm not even mad at Camron," he said. "I'm mad at myself. We let the fans down. We let Dipset down by lunchtime." Big hip-hop pages were repeating the audio, which no one could initially verify was authentic, with headlines like "Jim Jones regrets everything," and "The end of Dipset hits harder than we thought." Fans were divided. Some sympathized with him after hearing his voicemail express regret, while others wondered if it was a ploy to win over the public. However, behind the scenes, things were much more chaotic than anyone had anticipated. According to those close to Camron, he was not only about the fight, but also about how quickly Jim's camp had begun damage control. He believes Jim is attempting to spin. According to one insider, Cam feels deceived once more. Meanwhile, Jules Santana was trying his hardest to keep things from falling apart entirely. He started contacting both camps, enticing them to meet and talk resolve the situation. But neither Cam nor Jim was prepared. They were both to overcome by years of unresolved tension. Even Freaky Zicky, who had always been the comic relief when silent, his team issued a brief statement expressing his sadness at the events and requesting that fans give the group time to heal. What made matters worse was that the fight had not only affected Dipset, it had also opened old wounds in the hip-hop community. Artists who had previously looked up to the group started to speak out, some of their disappointment, while others shared stories of previous tensions they had personally witnessed. The security footage leaked from the venue's backstage surveillance camera late that night. Unlike the previous fan-film videos, this one was crystal clear, showing the moment Camron shoved Jim into a stack of speaker cases, followed by Jim swinging back and knocking over a table. The video was silent, but the violence spoke for itself, and fans were horrified to see their icons behave in this way. Additional footage showed crew members rushing in to break up the fight, with Jules trying to pull Jim away while a security guard pushed Cam back against a wall. This was the first time the producer told a blog that he had witnessed Cam and Jim fight over money years ago during a recording session. The footage rekindled the internet with hashtags like #DipsetTDownfall and #CamsHim, and news outlets ran with it, analyzing every frame like a sports replay. Experts even weighed in, saying that Jim's movement revealed emotional instability, and Cam's stance showed deep-seated frustration. The fight became a media circus, with talk shows referencing it as the week's biggest pop culture moment, and interviews being requested. However, behind the scenes, the consequences were becoming so real that the label funding the Dipset tour put everything on hold. Future dates were cancelled, contracts were frozen, and all reunion-related merchandise was removed from stores. One insider called the situation a financial disaster, and Cam's team blamed Jim. Jim's team accused Cam of being manipulative and controlling, and dozens of staff, dancers, and tech crew members who had been depending on the tour for work were caught in the middle. 2 days later, he posted a black screen on Instagram with a single sentence: "Sometimes silence speaks louder than words." Fans were perplexed as to whether this was the end, acceptance, or shade, and the comments went crazy as some pleaded for a truce and others called out Cam for being passive-aggressive. Meanwhile, Jim Jones performed a brief Instagram live, clearly moved, saying, "We're supposed to be legends. Not a headline I'm ashamed of. I lost my temper, but I'm not alone in that." As expected, this only added fuel to the fire. Cam's fans accused Jim of gaslighting. Jim's fans defended him, saying, At least he was owning up, and amidst all this chaos, Dipset's legacy was slowly unraveling. Radio stations pulled Dipset tracks from their daily playlists, unsure how the public would react. Podcasts dedicated entire episodes to the fight, with some suggesting that this was the most public group meltdown since MUA. Others compared it to the fall of June. One host said, "This is what happens when ego goes unchecked for too long." And then came the biggest twist of all. A woman came forward and said she had seen the fight, and that it wasn't about music at all, but rather a woman, according to her. Camron and Jim Jones had been romantically involved with the same woman for years, and recent events had brought that tension back to the surface. She said that Jim had found out that Cam had secretly reconnected with her, which was what started the argument backstage. The internet didn't care because it was juicy, scandalous, and exactly the kind of twist that fans love. Now, the fight was being framed as a love triangle gone wrong, with people making jokes about Dipset being the new reality show drama. Others expressed disappointment, saying that two legends should never throw away decades of legacy over a woman. Regardless of the truth, the story changed the narrative once more. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Two men who had once toured the world together were now unable to be in the same room. Lawyers were involved, damage control teams were working overtime, and the hip-hop community waited to see what would happen next. They were watching a group break apart, watching lives unravel in real time, and they couldn't turn away. By this point, both Cam and Jim were out on bail, but were ordered by the court to keep apart until the case was resolved. However, just when everything appeared to be at its lowest point, a phone call was unexpected and would completely alter the course of events. As the days went by and the public awaited rise behind the scenes, Camron and Jim Jones were dealing with more than just their personal transgressions. They were also dealing with the fallout from their actions. Fans, the media, and even their close friends and family were divided about what had happened. The truth was that nobody really knew what lay ahead for Dipset. Could they salvage what was left of their legacy? Or had the damage been irreparable? Camron, who was known for his cool demeanor, had been unusually quiet following the incident. His social media accounts, which were usually full of cryptic messages and jokes, had become eerily silent. Fans, especially those who had been supporting him for years, were beginning to worry because they hadn't seen Camron like this before. Camron was always the one to make light of a situation, to turn drama into something laughable. But this time there was no humor in his posts. He wasn't even posting this. However, Jim Jones was more outspoken than he could have been. His Twitter feed was full of comments about the situation, including an apology to fans, Dipset supporters, and even Camron. Some fans were not entirely convinced, though, with some applauding him for owning up to his mistakes, and others believing it was just another ploy to win back the love he had lost. Real men admit when they're wrong. One fan wrote, "But it doesn't change the fact that the damage is done. We won't forget what happened, Jim." The mixed reactions only seemed to add fuel to the fire. However, despite the drama and public division, there was a sense of inevitability. The big question: Dipset's permanent breakup. The rumors were rife at the time, with some sources saying that Camron and Jim Jones hadn't spoken in days, while others said that a reunion was possible, but only if certain requirements were met. Fans were left feeling torn. Some still believed in the group's power and the bond that had brought them together years ago, while others felt betrayed and their loyalty shaken to the core. Meanwhile, Jules Santana, who had always been the mediator between the two, was caught in the middle of it all, according to those close to him, who said that he was frustrated and hurt by the whole situation. He had worked so hard to keep the peace between Cam and Jim, and now it seemed like all that work was falling apart, but he was determined to put things right. He knew that if there was any chance of reconciliation, it had to begin with him. So he took matters into his own hands. After several tense days, Jules was able to get Camron and Jim Jones in the same room. It was a historic moment, the first time since the Brawl that the two had agreed to speak. But when they finally sat down, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Camron, known for his sharp tongue and quick wit, was unusually quiet, while Jim Jones was more open. He had been considering the consequences of his actions and was ready to address everything. The room was filled with an uncomfortable silence as the two men sat across from each other, the weight of their history and recent fallout hanging heavy in the air. "You know, Jim," he started slowly, breaking the stillness, "you disrespected me, not just in front of fans, but in front of family. That hurt." His voice was firm, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. "I know, and I can't take it back, but I'm here now, and I want to fix this. I want us to get past this, Cam," Jim Jones said with obvious remorse. "You said that before, Jim." But actions speak louder than words, and it was evident that there was still a great deal of hurt and mistrust between them. Camron paused for a long period, as if considering his choices before responding as the conversation went on. There were times when it seemed like they might be able to get back together. They discussed their shared past and the times when Dipset was at the top of his game. They laughed and reminisced, and for a brief moment, it felt like they were back in the studio working together, creating magic. However, reality soon set in, and fans were still waiting for a public statement from Camron and Jim Jones. The anticipation was killing them, and they wanted answers. They wanted to know if Dipset was truly over or if the two could work things out. Fans flocked to social media, demanding an update and asking for an explanation. One fan wrote, "You both hurt the fans. Now you need to fix this." Camron and Jim Jones couldn't hide forever. So when the time came, Camron posted a new message on Instagram. It was brief, but it said, "Sometimes the strongest bonds are tested. We've been through a lot. We'll figure it out. Stay tuned." Jim Jones then followed suit with a message of his own genuine talk saying, "We've been down too long. We're stronger than this. Stay with us." These messages didn't provide any specific answers that gave fans hope that perhaps Dipset wasn't done after all. But the question remained, was it too little, too late? Could the fans forgive them for the public spectacle, the fight, and the betrayal? Or had Camron and Jim Jones pushed too far, damaging the group beyond repair? Only time would tell. The news of the Backstage brawl broke like wildfire, rocking the hip-hop world to its core. Fans, media outlets, and even their peers in the industry were left in shock as the details of the fight unfolded. What had been a night of celebration quickly turned into chaos, and now it seemed as though the future of Dipset itself was in jail. The story followed two icons who had once ruled the rap game together, Camron and Jim Jones. As they battled for their legacy, would they find a way to heal? Or was the Ted really over? Word traded, followed by a physical altercation that resulted in the arrest of both Camron and Jim Jones. On the scene, the incident was described as intense, with both rappers allegedly throwing punches and creating an unavoidable scene. Witnesses at the scene said that security had to intervene. But by then, the damage had already been done, and the brawl had left fans wondering if the two iconic figures could ever mend their strained relationship. In the days that followed, rumors about the fight's cause spread like wildfire. Some claimed it was a personal disagreement between the two, while others pointed to deeper problems within the group. Fans who had previously viewed Camron and Jim Jones as brothers in arms were left wondering if they could ever trust each other again, reunite following this public act of violence. Or was this the last straw that would permanently destroy the group's legacy? While some fans stayed optimistic, others expressed their disappointment on social media, writing, "This is the end of an era." One tweet said, "Bye-bye was the best, but if they can't even get along, what hope do we have?" Similar feelings were expressed in the comments as people tried to comprehend the abrupt dissolution of one of hip-hop's most significant groups for years. Camron and Jim Jones had served as the faces of Dipset, and now their rivalry was tarnishing everything they had created. Camron never shied away from controversy, so he addressed the situation. In a series of posts on social media, he vented his frustration, saying that although he had tried to keep the peace, he felt betrayed by some people that would never change. He wrote, "I did my part, but when you constantly have to watch your back, it's time to move on." His harsh words seemed to confirm what many had feared, that Dipset as a group was no longer viable. However, even as Camron's message seemed to signal the end of an era, Jim Jones took a more subdued approach. Although his emotions were obviously running high, he hinted at the possibility of reconciliation, writing, "We've been through too much together to let one fight define us," adding, "I'm not ready to walk away, not yet." As the situation progressed, the media started to weigh in, with some outlets taking sides and others remaining neutral. Hip-hop blogs, podcasts, and news channels all weighed in on the drama, with many asking whether this public dispute was just a temporary setback or a permanent fracture. The timing of the altercation was particularly troubling, as Dipset had been preparing to embark on a highly anticipated reunion tour. Fans had been waiting for years to see the trio back on stage together, and it seemed like that dream was slipping further and further away in an exclusive. His words gave fans who still believed in the bond between him and Camron hope that they could resolve their differences and restore what they had once shared. Or was the damage irreparable? Jules Santana, who had always been caught in the middle of Camron and Jim Jones' arguments, opened up about the situation in an interview. He said that he had done his best to keep the peace between the two, but it was obvious that both men had reached their breaking points. "We were brothers," Jules said, his voice heavy with emotion. "But sometimes things change. People change. I can't force something that isn't there anymore." His words reflected the sadness and inevitability of the situation. Dipset had been a family, but now it felt like that family was falling apart. the public fallout from the fight continued to grow, and the pressure on both Camron and Jim Jones increased. Their fans were split, with some people expressing their disappointment and anger, while others were still holding out hope for a resolution. "We need it together," one fan wrote on Instagram. "Don't let this be your last moment." The road to reconciliation would not be an easy one, and even the most hopeful fans started to lose faith as the situation continued to spiral. However, as time passed, it became increasingly clear that this wasn't just a minor disagreement. There were issues at play that could not be easily ignored or forgotten. As Camron and Jim Jones struggled to navigate the aftermath of the fight, they were forced to confront their personal demons, old grudges, unspoken resentments, and feelings of betrayal began to surface. What had once been a brotherhood built on trust and loyalty seemed to be crumbling under the weight of ego, pride, and misunderstanding. As time went on, it became evident that Dipset's future was uncertain. Some sources claimed that Camron had already begun working on new music without Jim Jones, while others suggested that Jim Jones was considering a solo career. Neither rapper confirmed nor denied these rumors, but it was clear that the group's future was uncertain. The final nail in the coffin came when Camron and Jim Jones posted cryptic messages on social media, all but confirming that their professional relationship was over. Cameron's message read, "Sometimes you've got to let go, there's no love lost, but it's time to move forward." Jim Jones posted a similar message, "Sometimes it's not about being right, but about moving on." Their words left fans heartbroken but also resigned to the fact that Dipset was no longer a viable group. The fallout from the Backstage Brawl had been enormous, and although Camron and Jim Jones had once been inseparable, their fight had demonstrated that even the strongest bonds could be broken for Dipset fans. It was the end of an era that had been full of innovative music, unforgettable moments, and an undeniable cultural impact. But as the chapter on Dipset came to an end, there was still the question of whether Camron and Jim Jones would ever get back together. Only time would tell. But for now, it appeared as though Dipset was really over. What do you think, with all the drama, betrayals, and heartbreak? Do you, Camron and Jim Jones, can ever reconcile? Or is this the end of Dipset for good? Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. If you were taken aback by the dramatic turn of events, please hit the subscribe button. If you're a true fan of Dipset, you won't want to miss any of the latest developments on Camron, Jim Jones, and the future of Dipset. If you're following along, hit the notification bell to ensure you never miss a juicy update. Keep the conversation going. Share this video with your friends and let's talk about what happened. Until next time, stay tuned for more drama, updates, and all the gossip from the entertainment industry.